Hello, it's Sharon Leishman with Duwamish Alive on Rainier Avenue Radio with our new environmental program, Duwamish Alive. And we believe Earth Day is every day, and understanding our natural world we live in is critical to also the health of our environment and that of our communities as well. So we've been talking in other shows about our Duwamish watershed and its ecosystem. And today we are just thrilled to have Katherine Lynch, who is a fish biologist and recently retired from the city of Seattle, with us to talk about our salmon. And Katherine has been the person who has been caring for our creeks and streams in our area, especially those that are home to our salmon. So thank you, Katherine, for joining us. And I have to say, one of the questions I always get is, why is it so important to care about salmon? You know, especially if you live in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Sharon, and thanks for the great question. Salmon are a keystone species, so they are disproportionately influence the ecology and ecosystems of the Pacific Northwest. And what that means is that their presence is critical for maintaining biodiversity and the health of the habitat. I'm just going to back up a little bit and remind people that an ecosystem is a community of organisms, animals, plants, and microorganisms that interact with each other and with the physical environment, and they are located in an actual geographic and physical place. They function as a complete and interdependent unit. Examples of land-based ecosystems are forests and grasslands, and of water ecosystems are freshwater lakes and rivers and saltwater oceans and estuaries. Now, within an ecosystem, living members interact with each other and their physical environment by exchanging energy and materials through a series of physical processes. And by processes, these, you can think of processes as cycles or interactions or functions. They can be physical, they can be biological or chemical. And a good example of a physical cycle is the water cycle, which is essential to all life and all watersheds. And, you know, that's clouds produce rain that hits the earth, it flows over the surface and flows underground. And it's intercepted by sun and wind and plants that bring it back up to the atmosphere through evaporation, and that condenses and becomes clouds and starts that cycle again. There are biological cycles, and the one I'm going to talk about today is the salmon life cycle. And we've got a great figure here from the aquarium. And salmon begin their life in freshwater streams in the gravel, and that's on the very top left. And as those eggs develop, they hatch into small salmon that have yolk sacs on them, and those are called alevins, and that's moving in a clockwise motion to the right-hand side. And then the young salmon spend varying amounts of time in freshwater and in estuaries before they migrate to the ocean. And they spend up to 1 to 6 years in the ocean, returning as adults back to freshwater, where they spawn in the gravel and freshwater systems.
So when they come back after being out in the ocean so long, do they come back to the same place that they, were conceived?
Yes, yeah. Salmon have a remarkable ability to actually return to the streams in which they were born and actually to find the same locations where their eggs hatched. They don't all do that, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but it really is an incredibly remarkable ecological feat that's one of the things about salmon that's so amazing. One of the primary ways that salmon support their ecosystems and the health of the ecosystem is that they provide a significant source of energy, essentially food, and also materials in the form of nutrients that support the living creatures in the ecosystem. For example, there's about 137 wildlife that feed on adult salmon. Examples include the southern resident orca whales, bears, wolves, river otters, eagles. Salmon eggs and the juveniles are also a really important source of food for birds and insects, amphibians and reptiles. Now, most adult salmon returning to rivers die after they spawn. And this is really important because the decaying carcasses provide food and energy for the microorganisms like bacteria, which actually break down and release nutrients they release nutrients and recycle nutrients, which in turn become part of the soil. And that's where actually those nutrients end up supporting the trees and the plants in the areas next to the streams. So salmon really bring a lot of important energy into ecosystems and freshwater ecosystems.
So I'm just wondering, we have a lot of other fish in the Pacific Northwest. So, what is so special about salmon? What sets them apart from all these other wonderful fish?
Thanks for that question. I think first what I'm going to do is just point out that there are 5 species of salmon in the Pacific Northwest. And we've got a figure of that. And so your top left-hand corner is the Chinook salmon. It's also known as the king salmon. It's the largest and tends to be kind of the richest in terms of fat sources. The fish to the right of the Chinook salmon is a coho salmon, and it's also known as the silver salmon. And dropping down to the next line on the left-hand side, that is the sockeye salmon. It's also known as the red salmon. And to the right of that is the pink salmon. This pink salmon is the smallest and the most abundant of the salmon. It's also known as a humpy because of that humpback on its back when the adult enters fresh water. And then on the bottom is the chum salmon, also known as the dog salmon. So why are the salmon really special compared to other fish in the Pacific Northwest? Well, first of all, they live in both freshwater and saltwater. They are anadromous, which means they spend the early part of their life cycle in freshwater. They then migrate to the ocean, where they can grow faster and larger because of the abundant food sources, and then return after a period of 1 to 6 years into freshwater to lay their eggs or spawn. Now, salmon have a very large geographic range. They have a classic torpedo body shape, which really lends itself to mobility. And so they're fast swimmers. They can travel long distances. They can jump over obstacles. And so they have a very widespread influence extending along the coasts of the Pacific Northwest, Canada, and Alaska. And they can travel hundreds up to thousands of miles up very large rivers. Salmon also occupy a range of freshwater habits, from large rivers to very small streams, like even in cities. So there are a couple of examples of tributaries that feed the Duwamish Green River, and Longfellow Creek in West Seattle is a small stream, but it can support hundreds of coho and chum salmon. Salmon grow rapidly. They have high metabolic rates, but they don't live very long. Most adult salmon maybe average 5 to 10 pounds, and Chinook salmon are like double that. They average 20 to 30 pounds and can be over 50 pounds. So these are big animals. Growth facilitates their survival, and it also facilitates their reproductive potential. That means that that is expressed in terms of number and size of the eggs that they lay in the gravel. All of this increases the nutritional value of every life stage of salmon for the other living organisms in freshwater systems. Their tendency to die after they spawn transfers energy to the living animals and nutrients, both the food sources and the nutrients to animals, plants, and organisms living in river ecosystems. In fact, one of the essential ecological services, and it's a unique ecological service that salmon provide, is the upstream delivery of rich marine nutrients to freshwater systems. Salmon have been around for a long time, like millions of years, but recent glacial history, like in the last 10,000 years, has resulted in the rapid evolution of many populations of salmon. These are often associated with river watersheds, and they adapt to those watersheds. And this really happened through another special behavior of salmon. There is a tendency, even though salmon tend to return to their natal streams, they also stray. And this allows them to colonize new rivers or recolonize rivers where the salmon have been extirpated.
So now I have heard from others that what's fascinating is we always think about salmon, oh, they're in the river, and then we see their carcasses alongside, and we see the animals that, feed upon them. But it's amazing to me with scientific studies, correct me if I'm wrong, that they found salmon DNA in trees?
Correct. And this really is from the carcasses. When the carcasses break down and the bacteria breaks down the carcasses and small organisms, single cellular organisms break down, what they're doing is actually releasing those nutrients and recycling the nutrients to the environment. And so they get built into the soil, and that gets picked up by the trees. So yes, the trees actually contain material from the salmon. Really important that the salmon are bringing back those ocean, rich nutrients. Yeah.
And I want to say too, with our Duwamish River, if you go down to the area where Tukwila Community Center is, that area is what we call the transition zone. So those areas where the salmon are, sites that have been restored into salmon habitat, those are really critical for our river salmon to be able to rest and make that biological change from freshwater to start changing to adapting to saltwater, because that's where our river, since it's tidal, you have that tidal and exchange of both types of waters, right?
Yeah, you're correct.
I listen.
Yeah.
I listen to y'all. So I'm just wondering, with everything you've told us, what would happen if our salmon disappear? Because we know that there are a lot of just stresses on our salmon populations, especially those that are in our urban areas.
You're right. And so if the salmon were to disappear, think about just the wildlife alone, the 137 species that feed on salmon adults. Already they would need to find alternative food sources or face starvation. And so a really good and well-known local example is the resident southern orcas or killer whales. They feed almost exclusively on salmon, and they prefer Chinook salmon. But Chinook the Chinook populations are under pressure, and the Chinook numbers have been declining over the decades. And so the orcas are now forced to find other sources of food, and so they're feeding on smaller, less, both in terms of smaller and with less fat, the coho salmon. And so what has been observed is that some of the whales are showing signs of malnutrition over recent years. So it really can have a huge impact on individual species. But without salmon in our freshwater systems, the diversity of life in the Pacific Northwest streams would be greatly reduced, because it would be very difficult to find a source of food that is as abundant and energy rich and reliable as salmon. And this includes, like as you pointed out, trees, but also insects and microorganisms that rely on those marine nutrients that salmon bring back to freshwater systems. And when you think about it, if you reduce the biodiversity and just stress those animals in the freshwater systems, they really have less capacity to be able to respond to stressors in their life, like, and examples would be land use development, climate change, and resource extraction industries such as forestry, commercial forestry, and mining.
Well, and I'm thinking, and we haven't really touched on this too much, but you think of how salmon are part of our identity in the Northwest. And a lot of that identity does have to do with, not only how they are in our environment, but also, just economically. They're an important part of our fishery. And you think of culturally, especially for our Salish tribes, that they're not, they're not only important as a food source and a resource, but it's part of their story of who they are.
Absolutely. Salmon have a functional role and a foundational role in the region's culture, particularly for indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest, to whom salmon are sacred to their spiritual and their cultural identity. Identifying themselves as salmon people, the tribe's traditions, ceremonies, sustenance, and economies are centered on the annual return of salmon. Native Americans have a natural annual rhythm. They harvest salmon and then celebrate and give thanks for the returning salmon. And that's repeated each fall as the salmon return. So there's a balance. It is possible to experience one of these ceremonies. There's actually one coming up on the Seattle waterfront with the tribes welcoming home salmon on September 20th at Piers 58 and 62.
Yeah, and I would say, not only to the tribes there's a rhythm, but there's a rhythm to the rest of us as well. And how we celebrate our fall. I can't imagine celebrating fall without pumpkins and salmon. It's, it is just so deeply part of us. But I did want to ask you, I always hear that, like, especially the Chinook salmon have the threatened classification. So what does that mean, and why is that special?
So there are Chinook populations where the numbers are below the point where it's really, really safe to fish them. And as I already described, it can have effect on our orca whales. And so the federal government, for example, and the state and the tribes work together to regulate the salmon fisheries to try to protect them and allow them to recover and to come back. But it's a combination of things that really can bring the salmon back. It also requires a lot of protection of their spawning areas and their habitat, and also protecting each life stage as it moves downstream, and as the juveniles move downstream and the adults come back. So that's really doing things like maintaining open migration corridors.
And when you say open migration corridors, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand bird migration. Not sure I understand salmon corridor for salmon.
So, I mean, this is really maintaining that open pathway between freshwater and the ocean. And there are blockages that can happen. And they're typically some kind of infrastructure, such as dams on the Columbia River. There are dams on many of the Washington rivers. And even small infrastructure, like the pipes that go underneath, that carry a stream underneath a road, those can become blockages. There's a lot of things that can form blockages. And so the state, for example, has been working very hard to actually remove the culverts that are blockages and fix those.
And also, I know on the Duwamish River, because it's so industrialized, that there are portions, significant portions that have where the banks are all it's called armoring, but it's all basically rock. So how do the young juveniles coming down, where do they feed, or how are they able to use that section of the river?
It's really challenging. And so when you have a river that has stream banks that are really steep, then it's very difficult for juvenile salmon, because first of all, they are preyed upon by so many other animals, even adult fish, of other species, and so they need shallow water for protection, and they don't have that in a lot of streams. So it means they sort of have to gumboot it. They have to move very quickly downstream to go past these areas that do not have a lot of really shallow, fine sediments, really important, so that predators can't hide behind things. And so restoring that kind of habitat to the Duwamish River, for example, is really important, because it provides those resting areas and feeding areas for the juvenile salmon to make it down to the ocean.
Yeah, especially I would imagine in that transition zone where their bodies need to start acclimating to saltwater.
Yeah.
I would think that would be really important.
Yeah, it is important for them to have the time to actually make the physiological changes so that they can move into saltwater without adverse impacts.
So, I mean, this is the time I want to say to everybody, this is really, we call this salmon season, right? Because our salmon are returning. We can go out to our Duwamish River and you can actually see the salmon coming up. It is amazing. And this year, you mentioned the pink. So a lot of people associated with fishing always say, oh, it's a pink year. Yes, as what I said before, we don't wear pink. It's because the pink salmon are coming. And what I've heard from several people is that there are a lot of pink salmon coming up the river. So there are places, and you can go to our website, duwamishalive.org. We have a list of places to see. But if you live in South Seattle, this is in your backyard. So you can go down to the Tequila Community Center and see them in the river. You can go to Cecil Moses Park or Codica Park. Cecil Moses is great. It's called North Winds Weir, because you see how the river kind of, you know, is reduced into a narrow kind of slot there. But you'll just see how vibrant, and I'm always amazed that it just, this time of year, the river just comes alive with wildlife. So please get out and see the river, see these amazing fish, and then go join a festival. I have to say, like, Renton has a great salmon festival, and then Duwamish Alive, our Duwamish Alive event, is on October 18th, which you can join if you want to help volunteer in carrying and stewarding some of these places. But after that event at the Tequila Community Center, we are holding a salmon festival that is going to be bilingual. So it's in English and Spanish. And there'll be just a lot of fun activities, and you can learn more about salmon. And I'm told that, again, the most popular thing on this festival is you get to see a dead salmon and touch it and kind of explore its different parts, which last year there was a lineup to go see this dead salmon. You know, it's kind of beyond me, but so you know, I would just really suggest to you to get out. Also, Renton and the aquarium again is having their Cedar River salmon journey, and they are you can go to their website and find out the sites, but you can learn more about the salmon in the Cedar as well. So this is Sharon Leishman with Duwamish Alive Coalition on Rainier Avenue Radio, and with our Duwamish Alive show. And we want to thank Katherine so much for sharing with us this wonderful world of our salmon. Is that?